allowed. That's great.
That's right.
Because I'm not sure what we should do with it afterwards. If we all feel happy about it, we could put it online in the spoken word, for example, or share it with the yard spinners. And if we get very revealing stories that nobody is supposed to know, then we can know it. Or you can ask me to pause if you feel uncomfortable. Okay. And so I've asked Rob to start, but maybe before we do that, maybe everyone can introduce themselves briefly, starting with Mary Rose McCarthy.
Hey! Hello everyone. I know some of you, and I'm very pleased to meet the people I don't know, especially the two Bandonians. So I'm Mary Rose. I'm retired from lots of different paid jobs, and I now write as a freelance journalist. I write a lot for The Opinion and for The Echo, and I write short stories. I'm not very good at telling stories, but I'll try my best, and will probably speak too quickly and be finished in 5 minutes rather than 20, Moze. But I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's stories and having a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius. Anita, you're applauding, which is very nice of you. Could you introduce yourself as well?
Hello, my name is Anita Howard. I am a teacher. I live in Passage West, and I've been involved in storytelling for the last couple of years. Thank you.
Are you with the Cork Yarn Spinners? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Rae, would you like to?
Hi everybody from a wet Ballydehob. I've got the hat on, which means today I am the story pilgrim. So I'm ready to tell my story. I write stories and I tell stories. I'm a member of the Cork Yarn Spinners, and this is my first time doing a Zoom storytelling, so we'll see how it goes. I really live in Skip, but I'm just in Ballydehob for the internet. I'm pleased to meet everyone. Okay, take care.
Okay, Brian, would you like to continue? Tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian, and I am going to have my lunch as I'm talking to you, just for the very start, because I've been delayed. But it's great to be with you. I've been interested in storytelling for probably 4 or 5 years. I do some public speaking and teaching and that type of thing. I would normally work as a psychotherapist outside of COVID and all of that kind of stuff in the drug and alcohol kind of world. And so I am very passionate about storytelling. I don't think I'm any good at it, but we'll give it a whirl. So there you go.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I'm Moze. Then the next person is going to be Rob, obviously, and he's going to start to tell his story. Myself and Rae seem to be sort of moving along parallel lines through West Cork because we ended up, I split up from my husband, and then I traveled, and then I moved to Cove, and I moved in with a property management company called Camelot. And Rae is also like a guardian. We were guardians for properties. It's quite cheap, and you get a proper house, but the downside is that you have to move when the house is sold. So I lived in Cove, then the house was sold, then I lived in Skibbereen, and I ended up almost next door to Rae. Although we didn't see each other very much, we gave each other space. And now we're both in Ballydehob, but in different parts of it. And I'm now not living with Camelot anymore, but in a granny flat, which is fine, although there is no security at all, but that's okay. You can live with that. This session was because Rae started talking to me about storytelling or online, and thought it would be nice to do something together. I sort of represent the spoken word in Clonakilty, where we do monthly sessions, and it's not specifically storytelling, but it's every sort of spoken word, like people read poetry or poems, sometimes a bit of comedy, and there is storytellers, of course. And I think that's becoming increasingly important. And I have to say that the idea to put autobiographical stories out there. Seemed like a really nice and fun idea, but when I started trying it for myself, it became far more difficult and heavily emotional as well, because you look at your own ancestors. I've now learned to pronounce it properly, not ancestors but ancestors, and there's a lot of grief and difficulties in everybody's lives, I think, if you really look at it properly. So and one of the sources of inspiration was Rob over there, whom I've met once when he came to the spoken word, to the open mic bit the last time. And he told a story about his own background. And that sort of, I thought, okay, yes, it's possible to do that. Because in writing, it takes longer, but you also have far more opportunities to go every which way. And in story, you have to really come to the point, or you get lost somewhere along the way. I found I got lost a couple of times. So over to Rob. Maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and then dive into your story.
Okay. Probably the best thing to do as well is to tell me when I'm running on too much, or tell me when I've got 2 minutes, just so I put up and give everybody else a chance.
Okay.
Thanks, Rose. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so just me, I suppose in terms of what I do at the moment, I work on leadership development and innovation, and I particularly do a lot of work working with leaders in places like Kenya and Uganda who are trying to overcome urban violence. So I work on the leadership development bit of that, and as part of that, I use storytelling techniques and autobiography to get leaders to connect with themselves and their own history, first of all. So it's kind of understanding self. And as part of that, I have been known to share a bit of my own autobiography. I get people to imagine what, if their life was a book, what would the chapters be? And it can become very emotional, it can become but also very revealing, repetition of self-sabotage in terms of how people are with themselves, etc. So, but that's another story. So the thing I'm going to talk to you about today is about three feathers. Now the 3 feathers are symbolic. The symbolism, I'll tell you about them later. But why 3 feathers? At the moment on lockdown, not being able to go anywhere, I decided to start getting a bit fitter. So I started running around the field. Opposite where I live, it's the town park. And there's this nice field you can run around. So I've started running around it. And as I started running around it, I was also doing mindfulness. And I saw this feather one time sticking out the ground. And then another time I saw another feather. And then another time I saw another feather. And when I run around now, every time I run around, I clap my hands to show that I've completed another lap. And for some reason, I found this from a book about mindfulness, because I'm trying to practice mindfulness. And for some reason, I found that 3 feathers was the ideal number of feathers. And I even imagined the feathers talking to me. And then I started seeing how amazing the feathers were. And I make sure the 3 feathers are, if they come out the ground, I make sure I stick them in the ground. So I've been reflecting on why 3 feathers and what they stand for in my life, in my ancestry, in my heritage, and in my background. So I just want to take you back now a bit further to when I was born in 1968. So 1968 was a year of protest around Martin Luther King and Black Lives Matters and Les Événements and in Paris and overthrowing the system and all sorts of things. And a number of key people also unfortunately got assassinated, including Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy, my mom knew about Robert Kennedy because she was an au pair in the late 50s. And I was named after Robert Kennedy. Well, so I was born the same year. I was born not long after Robert Kennedy was assassinated in June 1968. And the thing was, my mum and dad, they were married, but just not to each other. Unfortunately, when I was born, the dad who brought me up, called Peter, my English dad, he knew about it when I was born, but unfortunately the midwife didn't. And what happened was, when I was born and I came out dark skinned, the midwife that had looked after my mum all the time that she'd been carrying me had gone on holiday. So this was a new midwife, and the midwife had a look on her face apparently saying, "Oh, he's rather dark, isn't he?" And my mum said, "Oh yeah, we went to Spain for our holidays." So where does that get us? Well, many years later, in 2003, I went off to Nigeria to find my errant father, or to find my birth father. And I didn't realize at the time why I was going, or I'd put it off for many years and not bothered, and I didn't realize quite why I was doing it. But I kind of was searching for something, and I realized once I went on this quest that I had to carry on looking and going and finding, and cut a very long story short, which I've written about elsewhere. Eventually, I did find this man who in my images as a child had been both a hero and a villain, flamboyant and serious. And I realized when I met him, his name's Gabriel. Not sure he was an angel. But when I did, as none of us are, when I did meet him, I realized something about myself, and that was that this meeting made me complete. This meeting made me feel like I'd become someone different. And this made me realize, growing up, that I'd never really felt like I belonged. And why did I never really feel that I belonged? Well, I never felt I really belonged because I was never allowed to be who I was. I was never allowed to be my full self. I had lots of people claiming me. My white family would claim and tell me I was all white anyway. Don't worry about skin color. I was all white anyway, you know. And then later, some black friends would say, "Oh, you know, you need to learn to get in touch with your blackness. You need to stop being a coconut," which means white on the inside, black on the outside. I remember one time at college, I was accused of being a coconut by a black friend, saying, "Why do you dress like a white person? Why do you dress like a white punk? Why don't you understand your roots?" This was long before I'd been to Nigeria, and we ended up having a big row. And then the only thing I could do was say to her, "Well, the only other black in my family is a dog." So basically, I was brought up with my birth mom, my white dad, and 3 white sisters, and that was another time. I've always loved telling stories and shocking people a bit, but I think it's sometimes a way of coping. Another time, a friend of mine was coming home with me, and I said to him, I have to warn you when I come home about myself. I'm the black sheep of my family. And he said, "Why? You've never been in trouble with the law, Rob? You're doing your studies. You seem quite reasonable and upstanding to me." And I brought him home, and he walked in on my family having dinner, and the look on his face, and he turned to me and I said, "I told you I was the black sheep." So, as you can see as well, I also am a bit of a bad stand-up comedian. But back to the three feathers. Is it a holy trinity in the field, in Bandon, in the town park? Why did I understand? Why am I content with these 3 feathers? Why are they my audience? Why are they my witness to how I am, or who I am, or what I've become? The answer is that in those three feathers, I've truly began and started to understand that, like in Ireland, inside of yourself, there is a thin place. There is another world. There is another world where if you opened it and you achieve self-actualization, you find all of your true self, all the parts of you. The thin place. The thin places don't just exist in cairns or ancient stones or places where there's been major things happening. They're not just at New Haven or Newgrange. They're not just at Stonehenge. They're not just in these places. They can be found within yourself. You see, those three feathers, they represent to me three different aspects of a journey of my life so far. Because those three feathers stand for being, becoming, and belonging. Being is when you're allowed to really be your true self, where you're allowed to really understand yourself and just be authentic. Becoming is when you find yourself and you become satisfied, you become able and knowledgeable about who you really are, or all those aspects of you. Those aspects that may have been hidden or you've denied because it's easier. Because it's easier to not have those questions fired at you saying, where do you belong? Or where do you come from? Oh, I'm from Birmingham. No, no, no. Where do you come from? Oh, I'm from Sturchley in Birmingham on Ford Ash Lane. No, where do you come from? A house in Birmingham? No, no, where do you? Oh, where am I of? I'm of Nigeria in West Africa. Oh, Africa. No, that's not Africa. Africa's not a country. There's nearly 50 countries there. Oh, Africa, yeah. Oh yeah, I'm ethnicity, a tribe, yeah, Yoruba. And then on the Nigerian side. So, can you even pronounce Yoruba? Can you even spell it? And when I say Yoruba, some of my African friends will go, ha 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 ha. Say it again. You don't pronounce it. I don't pronounce it right. But when I went to Nigeria and I saw another side, and I met my father, and then I met other siblings, I realized that was as much an important part of me. And just because I don't have all that knowledge, just because I don't know everything about heritage that everybody else might know about or other people know about, that doesn't stop me being who I am, me becoming and embracing that part of me. Because despite what's in the world and despite what people might say and despite all this, I have truly become who I am and are more satisfied and able to become all elements of myself, not hiding part away. So that's the becoming. And in the becoming, when I become, that's when I'm able to belong. Without the becoming, I can't belong. And I can't belong without truly being all the elements of who I am. So that's why those three feathers in the field in Bandon means so much to the boy from Birmingham, but of Abeokuta. That's it.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. That was really great. Before I ask for volunteers to fill the next slot, I would like to welcome Mr. Stan Notte. He has changed a little bit since I last saw him. Stan, are you there or are you hiding?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I thought the video was on. My apology. One second.
You're looking well, Stan.
Would you like to reveal yourself to your admiring audience?
I'm just there. Is that it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there's a weird background on it. I was playing with this the other day and I put that background up. I'll have to figure out how to get that off now as well.
Well, it is great. I mean, I never managed to get a proper background. Okay. Wow.
This one. Yeah. Apologies for being late. I for some reason I thought we were going to get another invite rather than the one that came before. There was problems with the store, so waiting for that, and then I realised, oh, we're already going. So yeah, apologies for being late, and thanks.
That's
for
okay. That's okay. Yeah, I think you arrived at 14:14 on the
Yeah,
14th of June. That's really great, and it's Donald Trump's birthday as well. Okay, before the next person starts, and I don't know who that will be, but it probably won't be you. Would you like to we've all introduced ourselves, so maybe you can do a quick introduction as well.
Yeah, okay. My name is Stanley Notte. I know Moze through the spoken word night in Clonakilty, and we've interacted on a number of different things over the years. I'm a writer, creative, poet, military trained. I'm a trained killer. Don't ever forget that before you piss me off. Although those skills have probably diluted quite a bit because I'm gone 14 or 15 years. And regards this, I'm actually really looking forward to it. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. I wanted to hear 3 or 4 people before I decided exactly what I wanted to do. But yeah, look, it's great to be here. And I see a few friends there, Rae, Anita. Hello again, Dr. Rob. I haven't seen you since the night I picked you up in there.
No. Thanks for that lift. That's where it all started.
Yeah. So
I didn't realise I was getting into a car with a trained killer.
I think you underestimate your skills as a stand-up comedian, Rob.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's it really. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. I'm just saying, I also wrote that I'm recording this at the moment, so if you want to sort of keep everything a secret, you can let me know. Is there a volunteer who wants to do the next slot?
I'd love to get it out of the way.
Okay. That's very positive approach. Get it over with, quick.
Get it over with, yeah. I'm just opening up the document. I suppose my story is a little bit different. I've called it The Land is the Danger, My Ancestors and Other Animals. And I believe our lives circle back on us and re-echo down the years. Even families as fragmented as mine, who are always moving around. Our records are scrappy and not all the pieces of the jigsaw are complete. I am of water and light, of solitude and resilience, foreign lands and possibly piracy. Our family never seemed to remain long in one place, always looking for adventure and change. Some origins, as far as I can trace, go back to Glanville, a small village in France. And from there, the mighty buccaneers set sail and pitched up in Suffolk in England and Goleen in West Cork. And enterprising folk they were, they took job as coast guards. And the fellow in Goleen was very enterprising and never even got potato blight, so he survived the famine. So from there, somehow my great-great-grandfather Thomas was born in Suffolk. And again, we've no idea, he ended up somewhere in Ireland, became a lighthouse keeper and married Kathleen Byrne. They had 8 children and lived in various lighthouses around the coast of Ireland. Kathleen lived to be the age of 108.
Wow.
And last November, her last remaining daughter died 2 months shy of her turning 108, which is a bit of a record to be setting. All the men in the family went to sea in one form or another. Even great uncle Paul, who they made go to university to study medicine, as soon as he was finished, he set off to sea as a ship's doctor. So the sea calls us deep unto deep. And it's interesting that the human body is comprised of 60% of water. The weight of water. We sail on it, we swim on it. And yet when our time on the sea is finished, it retains no trace of us. Neither does the air we breathe retain our shape once we've walked by. Air and water are essential to human life. Possibly because of their location, often perched as they are on the edge of land, lighthouses have always retained an interest for everyone, I think. And Irish Lights are the commissioners who are responsible for overseeing lighthouses in Ireland. And they've set up 12 of them as a tourism initiative, where you can go and stay in the keepers' dwellings, or sometimes in the case of County Wicklow, in the actual lighthouse itself. And they were built as aids to navigation, but the very first aids to navigation were fires lit along the shoreline to guide vessels to land. Then came wooden structures, succeeded by the stone-built towers we see today. And some of those towers also had fog signals depending on their location. Now, with the advances in technology, it is no longer necessary to have personnel living and tending the light at these coastal locations. Neither are fog signals required due to the more sophisticated systems such as GPS that we have for navigation, safely navigating. But lighthouses still play a vital role in aiding maritime safety for both commerce and for leisure. Samuel Glanville, my grandfather, was one of 8 children born to Thomas, who originated in Suffolk, and Samuel was born in Dublin. At some stage in Samuel's life, Thomas served at the Galleyhead Lighthouse near Clonakilty, and for a while Sam attended the Rathbarry National School. At the outbreak of World War I, the family was in Kilkeel, County Down, and Sam joined up to serve in the war with the British, well, we were all the United Kingdom at that point in time. The urge for adventure and possibly steady wage being the attraction. He served in the Machine Gun Corps and saw action in Belgium, France, and Germany. At some point he was hospitalized, but we don't know why or where. After the war, he got the Spanish flu, but made a very good recovery. He then trained in telegraphy and went to sea as a radio officer. He went on all sorts of voyages. My mother still has his passbook. And some of these voyages included going to as far as New York. And somewhere along the way, he also picked up skills as a carpenter. Then he joined Irish Lights and became a lighthouse keeper, as his father had done, the circles within circles. His brothers either became keepers or also went to sea. Jack served in Rathlin Island as a lighthouse keeper. Tommy became a seagoing captain and served with Irish shipping until its demise, it went broke. And Tommy also had a house in Goleen, the tug of the West Cork landscape coming through in the DNA somewhere. When the brothers did meet up, which was fairly rare, their first greeting to each other was, "What cheer?" And that's the opening lines from The Tempest by none other than Shakespeare. My grandfather Sam met and married Josephine Purser from Fermoy, and they had 3 children, Michael, Mary, and Martha. As soon as was humanly possible, Michael went to sea, the tradition again. Martha died in childhood from complications of type 1 diabetes, and Mary is my mother and still thankfully with us. All children were born in Greencastle, County Down, not so far from Kilkeel, where Sam joined up for the war. When my mother was 2, they moved to the Inishowen Peninsula in County Donegal. There, she hated the sound of the foghorn. One evening, her father went with her out on the headland and played the mandolin to attract seals. She remembers watching the seals, wondering if they were watching her as she was watching them. Pauline Fitzgerald brought my mother to school on her first day ever attending school in Donegal. Pauline married Larry Butler, a lighthouse keeper, and became a keeper herself. Larry and Pauline served at the Galleyhead Lighthouse. More circles. We knew their children going to school. 2 of their sons became lighthouse keepers. Gerald still serves with Irish Lights and also the Landmark Trust, who now run the dwellings there as holiday cottages. In 1939, my mother's family were transferred to Cove. Her mother came home from picking blackberries one day and told them that war had started. Sam spoke of joining up again. His wife said, "If you do, then the children and myself will not be here when you return." That was the end of any talk of going to war. I think it a brave statement to make in 1939 when the term single mother had not yet been invented. During the year 1942, my mother attended 3 different primary schools in the same year. They were in Cove, then transferred up the country to Skerries before finally coming back down to West Cork to serve at the Galleyhead, where Sam had spent time as a child. My mother attended the very same national school as had her father. During the brief time they were in Skerries, Martha, her sister, dug up dandelion roots and sold them to those who were making a substitute for coffee during the Second World War and the rationing in Ireland. And this substitute made of dandelion roots and who knows what else was called Coffo Era. These travels up and down the country were by train at a time of severe shortages in our rural country. Turf powered the trains after coal became scarce. According to the Kerryman newspaper, writing in 1942, the Cork to Dublin train took 20 hours. Are we there yet, with 3 children and a cat? When they came to Clonakilty by train in 1942, it was dark, having travelled from Dublin changed in Cork to the West Cork line, and changed again at Gaggan for Clonakilty. My mother said they'd never experienced darkness like it. As they walked down McCurtain Hill to the Imperial Hotel where they were going to spend the night, her father told them to all stay close together. The next morning they went by pony and trap out to the Galley Head. It was December 18th, a week before Christmas. My mother was 7 before she saw an actual ship or met nuns. The first time she saw sugar beet on the side of the road in West Cork, she thought it was parsnips. And the first time they saw the hooded cloak in West Cork, she thought it was nuns. The light at the Galley Head was first shown in January 1878, and at that time it was the most powerful light in the world. Lord Bandon campaigned for the lighthouse because of so many shipwrecks in the area. It was designed by the engineer-in-chief to the Commissioner of Irish Lights, J.S. Sloan, and he also designed the outbuildings, which included at that time a gas house, as there was great interest in using gas as a source of power for the light. The tower is 69 feet high, painted white, and at the edge of a sheer cliff. The light shines to sea and to land, the only one in the country, as far as I know, to do that. And the reason given is possibly an urban legend that the Sultan of Turkey, while staying with Lord Carberry at nearby Castle Creek, asked why the light did not shine on him as well as on the sea. And Lord Carberry spoke to his friends in high places and had the request granted. At one time in the 70s, there was talk of having it shine only to sea, and the local people asked that it continue its landward flashes, which it still does to this day. Towards the end of the Second World War, in March 1945, a German U-boat, U-260, sank off the coast near the Galley Head. In the middle of the night, Sam Glanville, my grandfather, asked the children if they wanted to see soldiers who were in the assistant keeper's house next door. And of course they said yes straight away, and there they were in the kitchen watching events unfold. The soldiers came in 2 batches and were escorted to safety up a steep cliff of 133 feet by the Irish coast watchers who were on duty at the lookout post nearby. Because my grandfather had picked up smatterings of French and German during his experiences in World War I, there was some rudimentary conversation able to take place, and the soldiers understood that they were in Éire, which the Republic was called during the war, and they knew Éire was neutral. They were given instant Irish coffee to drink because tea was rationed. I can only shiver to think of what they thought of this syrupy mixture. And anyway, given that they were from the continent, it was also thought that coffee would be their favourite beverage. The soldiers left behind gifts of cigarettes, white chocolate, and a dried kind of meat known as pemmican, which my mother didn't particularly like. They also gave a coin for the new baby born in Joe's house. Joe was the assistant keeper. And they gave an aluminium paddle that they'd use to row their life raft to the shore. And my mother still has that. There were 11 soldiers came up at the cliff at Galley Head, and another 37 were picked up by Cork-McSherry lifeboat off the sea near the coast of Schull. In the morning, the local defence forces came to take the 11 men from the Galley Head, first to Collins's barracks in Cork, and later they were interned in the Curragh, and they served out the remaining of the war there before going back to Germany in August of 1945. Through a German friend that some of you know, Silke, another writing colleague, I've been able to make contact with the son of the commander of that U-boat who lives in Germany. And before we had this lovely virus, there were plans that he would come to visit Ireland and meet my mother, whom he says is the last living link in the whole story. So circles within circles, we circle back until we come to ourselves. 2 of my sisters now live in Suffolk, where great-grandfather Thomas lived for a time. I swim in the sea as often as I can all year round. The ocean draws me. Water calling to water. What cheer. It is the nearest I will come to experiencing being in amniotic fluid. Our first 9 months we spent swimming. There are 8 of us in family, and all of us have travelled and lived outside of Ireland. Some still do. all looking for adventure, all restless. Each time we return home or host visitors, one of the first trips that is always made is to the galley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Rose. Thank you, thank you. And it's great to know that you will live to 108.
It's some record to set, isn't it? Yeah. That's what I keep saying to my mother when she says she doesn't know if her new car will see her out. I say, well, she's got another 30 years to go, you know, just keep up with the record. Thank you. I'm not sure if it's what you were looking for, Moze, but it's kind of what came to me.
It's brilliant. Thank you. What I was looking for. No, this is what I was looking for. Stories within stories within stories. Anita, would you care to go next?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Remote and isolated conditions. A sense of imminent threat and destruction. And all of it overseen by the presence of two mysterious small girls in matching outfits. Well, to anyone with a knowledge of Hollywood's finest horror films, it doesn't sound too good, does it? But this is not The Shining. It's my lockdown room in Passage West, the room where I work and write. And the two little girls are here, but they make no unpredictable moves. They're just present, watching me at all times, as now. And here they are. The child who is sitting down is my grandmother, Margaret Collins, later Howard, known then and ever after as Madge. The child standing is her twin sister, Frances. And they're both looking out at us from the year 1897, on the day they turned 4. My grandmother made sure I knew the story from an early age, as I looked up at the photograph that dominated the wall of her small front room. There were no snapshots in those days. It meant a journey by the Harbourside Railway all the way to a studio in Cork City, where they were posed in a wicker armchair, just big enough to contain them both. And they're wearing their presents, 2 matching fur-trimmed coats, made by their dressmaker aunt. To the end of her life, my grandmother retained the sense of style she discovered that day. But there's something more deeply compelling about the image of the 2 little girls, particularly in the gaze of Frances. She dominates the image. She owns the wall, owns the frame, as she owned the wall of my grandmother's house, where she looked down on her grown-up sister as an old lady in her own armchair. Whenever we look at her, it's hard to look away. And perhaps that's fitting. Of course, I also knew from an early age how that particular story ended. The photograph captures more than a moment. It also encompasses a life. Not long after it was taken, Frances died of a sudden and catastrophic attack of measles. And so, over the years, as I grew up with the photograph, I was often drawn in by the eyes of Frances. I thought about the life she should have lived. At her feet, Madge, my grandmother, seems almost incidental, stealing her way into the image. It was only when we got the photograph restored in recent years to hang on our own wall that I saw what its old frame had hidden. Madge's hand isn't resting on the photographer's studio armchair. It's lying comfortingly on her sister's foot, reassuring Frances as they faced an array of photographic equipment that was less than child-friendly. And that moment revealed more about their relationship than any words my grandmother could have spoken. It was as if she had reached out across time and brought both children back before me as they'd been in life. Over 100 years ago, child mortality was not a rare thing. There was little research into the lifelong effects that twin bereavement could have. The sense that something would always be missing, that the child who survived somehow had to take on the characteristics of the one who was gone. My grandmother, overshadowed forever by the memory of her first loss. The question is, and the question that's come to my mind more often since the pandemic, is, was that really how she saw it? I think of what she knew as she lived on, a life of well over 90 years. I think of all the events that swept away the world she posed for so innocently in 1897. 2 world wars, the chaotic but indomitable forging of her nation's independence, the rampant epidemics from polio to TB that left her to bring up 8 children without a husband in the 1940s, the poverty, the hardship, the uncertainty of life. I was one of many grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew the quiet reassurance of her outstretched hand and the smile that completely transformed her serious face. But I had lived well into womanhood before I had to face the kind of loss that awaited the twins who had watched over us all for years. And through my grandmother's quiet example, the girl who lived, the survivor, I knew how these losses could be overcome. And so, in the world of lockdown, speaking from my own posed armchair and looking ahead to a new world, whatever that may be, I am still watched over with great intensity by 2 little girls in matching fur coats. But it was only in the world of lockdown that they both began to speak to me. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Anita. That was powerful as well. Is there a volunteer among the 4 of us?
I don't mind going now, Moze.
Okay, please go ahead, Rae.
Okay. With her knotted, knuckled fingers, she picked up a stone. A simple, small pebble, like a grey bead. She stretched out her palm and was about to say, "Unclock Shaw." But then she remembered I did not have her language. "A stone," she said, "is like a word. Go on, touch it, feel it, explore it, but never toss it thoughtlessly." Then the baggy figure of my grandmother trailed into her bleached cottage. It was many years later that I fully understood the context of that statement. Then I was just a young girl with ivory ribbons in my hair who stood silent, wrapped in the Donegal mist that sculled the landscape like hungry ghosts. Now, it could be said that my grandmother had the body and eyes of one who was sculpted in the dark red clay and green hills of Donegal. The Derry Mountains towered, looking down on the harsh, treeless wilderness. It was another world, one which moved no faster than my grandmother on foot. The next day, the grey clouds coughed out rain, but that did not deter my grandmother and I for going for a walk. I shinned in my red, shiny boots. Raindrops bounced off my face and funneled down my neck, watering life into my imagination. But the ice-chill wind of sorrow ricocheted around, its fury shifting the sobs of memory in the nearby gully. My grandmother stopped and she pointed to the bridge. That bridge, she said, has a sorrowful tale. It's the place where I said goodbye to your mother. I was sure I saw one salty tear slip from her eye, and she continued. It was the place where the broken said goodbye to their kith and kin before they continued their journey somewhere, leaving Donegal absent of its young. The endless tale of a land tortured and cursed by the exile and the hungry. Well, fear nipped my throat as I sensed echoing sound of footsteps on the bridge. And I thought I saw the bent figures of the wretched shuffling in a night as empty as the promise of tomorrow. Perhaps it was the innocence of youth, but my eyes were drawn to their feet, slipping and slapping on the stones. For I saw what I thought would be imprints. And the imprints were seeping down deep into the stones, morphing into words that would settle in the heart and the mouths of the tales and the songs that would be told and sung in Glasgow. My journey back home to Spam Valley was indeed challenging. I always had that desolate sense of the alien, a stranger in a land where I was born. I felt reined in by the whitewashed houses with manicured gardens and lace curtains, crammed together and bound by the ropes of etiquette. For my head was lost in the grand designs of clouds, and I would sit in school lost in enchanted worlds of forests, white wolves, and dragons. But the clatter of the duster would interrupt my wanderings, because there was to be no daydreaming in class. Now I hid my eyes from the sycamore trees which lined the main street in military fashion. I could not gaze upon their sadness. They appeared so tame, lost to the natural wildness. What is it about the wild that humans fear? However, I would escape to the clacking of Campsie, where even the stones cracked open with story. Pine trees guarded the rolling plain of Finn. My buddy, Patrick, a mischievous kid with carrot red hair. With him, I could breathe. I could escape from the words that hurtled in the wind that ripped me apart. You have to be a doctor, a lawyer. You need good grades. Grades, grades. How those words ripped my soul. Now, since moving to Glasgow, my mother had dropped the Mary from Margaret Mary. Perhaps it was better that way in a city that was divided by orange and green, where names do matter. She said very little, if anything, about her past, and she never sang the stories or the songs. She embraced a new world where there was new words, stilettos, hairdressers, formica, a landscape where even the potato was fast and instant. But I could see how the wind that hurtled in the words even pierced her soul. Words that did not make us feel welcome. Fenian, Tim, no Irish need apply, thick, paddy. Yes, that is why I did not feel welcome. I was perhaps about 17, 18 when my grandmother passed over. I remember it was a night when there was a crescent moon, but it had stepped aside to allow the stars to radiate in their sheer brilliance. The wind sighed softly, and I thought, in fact, I would say I knew, I could hear my grandmother say, "Don't forget the stories." Now, it would be wrong of me to say that my grandmother was the archetypal wise woman. She would have dismissed that. She would have said it was nothing more than the foolish notion of someone who wants myth. Her life was harsh, and her face revealed it. But there was a beauty and a permanence that was beautiful. My night of silence was interrupted by my mother, who came through the door, her face tinged with pink and her eyes wide. Your grandmother, she's dithery. I mean, why? Why would she think you would want a stone? And then she opened the window and she tossed the stone through the window. Yes, a stone. A simple stone like a pebble. My mother saw nothing of value in that stone. She only saw monetary. But I, that night, saw something different, which has stayed with me until now. There you go, my friends.
Thank you very much, Rae. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful stones and words. Brian, would you be willing and able to do the next story?
Hi everyone, I'm very willing. I'm not sure how able. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, so I don't know if I've got poetry or prose or story, but it's entitled "Who Am I?" And it's the story of my life from the beginning to the end of what I perceive it'll be, and it encompasses all the significant relationships that have interwoven in my life and the story of my life. Who am I? I can't remember the beginning. Someone put a tag on my arm that I still have in a drawer somewhere. The label says Brian Joseph Synnott. But am I more than what's written on a cardboard label with a piece of string? My first memories begin on the kitchen floor, playing near my mother's feet as she did what mummies do in the kitchen, as she hummed continually. Dance, dance, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and he leads you all wherever you may be, and he leads you all in the dance, said he. Today, she's 86, and she still hums the same tune. I know she's well and content and feeling safe when I hear that little tune, and then somehow, so am I. There is the short family movie with me on my father's shoulder. He's my very own personal superhero. My siblings are there too, playing and somewhat doting on their little brother. Who am I? I am a happy chappy with music and song and toys and fun and play. Later, I sit alone, my new bright colored plastic smelling school bag and shiny new pencils aren't much comfort as I sit alone, frightened, in front of Mrs. O'Callaghan and 1,000 other boys and girls weeping and laughing and playing. As it turns out, Mrs. O'Callaghan, with her deep, crackly voice, is kind and gentle, and the 1,000 other children somehow morph into some of my friends and cowboys and Indians. Who am I? I'm a bright, happy little boy, sometimes frightened with a smile on his face, with nice new pencils, and let's not forget a smelly school bag and a new label and a sheriff's shiny badge. Later, I show my friends some special tracing paper that my daddy gets from work. It's different than anybody else's, you know. Who am I? Well, I am special, unique, maybe just a bit better than you. Later, Mom isn't humming and I overhear my dad, always a kind, well-meaning man, whisper quietly, "There's no hope for Brian." He could have meant that there was no hope for me in football, and he'd be right. But all I heard was the funeral bell of all hope knocking upon my soul. There's no hope for Brian. Well, you must be right. You're always right. And if you don't believe in me, I'll become an atheist to me too. Who am I? I'm lost, alone, cold, and I can't see. Later, I sit biting my faded pencil with a brain freeze. The darkness has gotten darker and I stare blindly at a copybook with numbers and letters that make no sense because I can't see the point. The teachers join in with the choir of hopeless serenades as they smile with pity and grin and smirk and validate. Yeah, you're special, all right. Very special indeed. Remedial, repeating, worse than the other cowboys and even the Indians. You'll go far, Synnott, and the further the better. So I did, because that is who you tagged me to be, remedial, repeating, unique. But now I'm drifting too far from the shore. Later, I'm sitting in a drug-infested party, sitting on the floor as couples ascend and descend the stairs. I'm no sheriff here. Nothing is shiny. It's dark and smoky and smelly. But that's okay. I think because that's who you told me I am, so that is what I do. I wonder if my mother is humming now. If only I could sit on his shoulders. But forgotten the song. And the water's too deep. There's no dance upon my feet, because that is who I am. Later, I stare at my coffin, wondering who could bother coming to see of the boy who drifted too far from the shore. Who am I? Different, unique, lost, and alone. Gazing with wonder into an abyss, I stare meaninglessly at the ceiling above. From my empty ache inside, I cry. No, I whimper. Please show yourself to me. But there's no answer, because there's nobody there. Who am I? A floating, smashed piece of driftwood on the bouncy sea that's bigger than me. Later, a strong arm hand picks up a waterlogged piece of wood, washed it down and dried it out. Still bruised, splintered, rotten, but held in his grip. No longer alone. At first he seemed scary, out of this world, you know. I sing, I was lost, but now I'm found. Who am I? Lost and found, full of hope and desperately without it. At the mercy of a violent pinball machine in my head that plays vigorously, throwing me around the room of opposite extremes. Dancing on the shoulders of destiny and trodden by the shadows of despair. A Gulliver being invited to stand but held by the chains of melancholy past. Later, A ring is put on my finger, but so much more, an embrace that encircles my heart. Gosh, you're scary, but warm and loving and loyal and true. What do you see in me? But I see everything in you. You are me and I am you. Who am I? I'm found. I'm lost. I'm staring into your eyes. I am loved, but I feel so much pain. My bruises are sore and my splinters are sharp. The tears in your eyes send daggers to my heart. I am my beloved, and she is mine. The strong arm hand pushes the planer. Later, I stare into distance and wonder at what I haven't seen before. The hope, the beauty, the trust in those tiny jeweled eyes, the contentment on your mommy's breast. You will dance upon my shoulders as I did on his, and he most likely did on his. I love you, you love me, we're a happy family. When your little hand grasps mine, be careful, my boys. There's a few splinters in those hands. I know my endless humming annoys you, but when I hear your little melody, I know you're okay too, with your bright colored plastic smelling school bag and shiny new pencils too. Who am I? I am trusted. I am looked up to. I'm strong. I'm dependable. I'm believed. I'm weak. I'm incompetent, overwhelmed, loved and not loved, not alone and alone, afraid and happy and sad and despairing. The strong arm, the strong warm hand moves the lathe across my hand. Later, the house collapses upon my head. The dam that kept the weight of gloom and doom has breached, and I can no longer hold it back. The pinball machine awakens its punching rhythm, and the cables of Gulliver rigorously tighten and throw me to the ground. I lay there with a mouthful of dust. The dam breaks onto my cheeks and turns my ashes into a muddy psalm. There's no hope for Brian, he said. He must be right. He always is. The warm, strong hand clears the sawdust away, and there I can see there are no shackles that hold me down, but my grip upon a splintered wire. He warmly whispers, you can let go, you know. He wasn't always right. I howl like a banshee on a winter's night as I finally released my grip upon that rusty old cable. Who am I? Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. The warm, strong hand rubs the oil upon my hand. Later, land ahoy! We're not too far from the shore. Stumbling but standing, no longer alone. The pinball machine is broken. The banshee long since drowned in the sea that is bigger than me. She no longer serenades me. Who am I? A little lost, but on the ground. In need of more sanding, no doubt, before the paint is applied. You're not so scary after all. Neither is she. Nobody is. Those lads would crush my shoulders now, but soon they'll have theirs dancing on them. I wonder what song they'll serenade to their little ones. Later, much later, somehow it's so scary again. The hands are splinter free, but the heart is not what it used to be. No doubt I'll be surrounded by all who make me smile. Soon your doting boys will be shouldering me. I stare at the ceiling and there you are, smiling and waiting as we wait for the paint to dry. Your strong hand finally comes for me, and together we will dance home for eternity. Who am I? Some say I am the name on the cardboard tag on the piece of string upon my big toe. But I am more than that. I am an open-handed, happy chappy. No sheriff's badge or smiley shining bag or pencils too. But I am everything you've all made me to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. That was really moving and very, very honest as well. I love the structure. It's good. Stan.
Yeah, let's see how we go. Just first of all, Brian, more than able, my friend, more than able. That was fabulous. Well done. Really well done. I've kind of become enamored in the last little while with probably, having attended a lot of the yarn spinners and a few other bits and pieces, I've kind of come a little bit more enamored with trying to do things without necessarily having everything written down and just seeing how that goes. So I have notes, but I haven't actually written a story. But we'll see how it goes. And the other thing is that when I spoke to Moze about this initially, a couple of things came to mind when she mentioned ancestry. The very first thing that came into my head was my grandfather, who's long since left us, unfortunately. He went in 1982 when I was 17 or 18, and I had a very interesting kind of relationship with him. And then the second thing that came into my head was DNA and how that follows us, if you want. So I think they're kind of the themes that I want to tease into whatever comes out at the moment. So I often say to people that I deal with either a mental health issue or a personality issue that's known as split nationality. I'm not sure if you can be diagnosed with split nationality. I'm not sure if there's any academic research around it, but I'm 100% certain it exists. My family lineage is Italian. My surname, which is Notte, spelled N-O-T-T-E. Interesting story, the E only exists in my family. Nobody else in the family has it. My mum and dad had me and my twin sister out of wedlock in 1965 at a very young age. And when my mother was completing her birth cert, she put an E on her name. Nobody else has it. But the Italian name Notte derives from night time. I grew up believing it was Italian for night in shining armour, and was bitterly disappointed on my first visit to Italy to see next to my bed a little night light that had Notte on it, as in night time, so it actually means darkness. That's had an influence on my life that maybe we won't discuss today. And apart from that, and the fact that my dad's great-great-great-grandfather moved to Cork, I don't know a huge amount about that side of my family. There was, to put it mildly, a fissure in my dad's family before he met my mum, and that kind of became a much bigger one when we were around 12 or 13, and I don't have an awful lot of contact with that family. In addition to that, my dad is a very, very private man, and what little I know of his childhood, I actually know through my mother. So that side of my split nationality, the Italian side, is quite vague. The second component of my split nationality is my mum's lineage, which is Murphy's. None of you will be shocked to hear that there's lots and lots and lots of Murphys in Ireland. And my mum did spend some time exploring that family tree, but because it is so complex, then there's not a huge amount of information there going back beyond my grandfather, apart from who we're connected to. I suppose with my grandfather, I was born in Cork in 1965, and I lived with my grandfather and my grandmother and with my mother until 1969 when I was 4, and then we went to move to England, which I'll come back to. It's kind of subconsciously I know that I must have bonded with my grandfather because I had a very close relationship with him when we lived in Cork at a later stage. And he was a very interesting man. he had spent some time in the military. Like a lot of Cork families at that time, he had grown up in poverty. And in actual fact, his own family, as in when he married and had his own children, they lived in pretty much poverty as well. There's stories within that family of them relying on St. Vincent de Paul parcels, not just at Christmas, but at other times. But he was an extraordinarily energetic man. He was a very small man. People would have said that he had a chip on his shoulder due to his size. I actually disagree with that. I think he had a chipper on his shoulder due to his size, and maybe even had a chain of chip shops on his shoulder due to his size. He was always fighting, always looking for, maybe not looking for aggravation, but he really knew how to stand his ground. And I have memories of him standing his ground. One in particular in Youghal in around 1977 or 76 or 77. We spent a lot of time down there, down on the train, the old days. Those of you from Cork will remember those days when the trains to Youghal on a Saturday and Sunday would chock-a-block with people, and we amassed on the beach and then headed to pubs or the Walter Raleigh Hotel for a drink afterwards. But I have a distinct memory of my grandfather with a few drinks in him, and I'll come back to that as well, creating a ruckus in the Walter Raleigh Hotel with a German family, because he had asked them to sing and they didn't want to sing, and he just took severe umbrage to it. Now, it wasn't a physical fight, let me make that clear, but there was a lot of noise around that, and that was quite typical of my grandfather. He was a very, very strong union man. He worked for McKinney's. He was involved in the unions at a very young age. He was a manager in McKinney's. He became a local representative for the union, and he was very, very strong on standing up for other people and trying to improve conditions for other people. Of course, that's a theme that is very strong in our world now, but if you go back to when my grandfather was a young man, it's way back in the 1920s and 30s, that was a new movement, and he was involved in that and stayed with that right throughout his life. I mentioned the fact that, with a few drinks and he created a ruckus. He was very fond of a few drinks. You could make a very strong argument that he was an alcoholic. That's never been proven. He would have denied that to his dying day. But one of my favourite memories of him, and it wasn't unusual for him to be carried home from the pub. My mum and dad grew up my mum grew up in a place called Greenwood Avenue in Cork, and at that time, local pubs only around the corner. And we were sitting in the living room one day looking out the window, and he arrives at the gate with two men carrying him on either side of him to the gate, and he is definitely under the weather from drink at this stage. But they got him to the gate, they opened the gate, and they stepped him through the gate, and then they left him. But when you came through the gate 2 steps later, there was 3 steps down onto the pathway into the house. And when he went to take the first step, he veered over to the right and fell into the garden. So my mom and a few other people went out and pulled him in. We were there. When I say we, it was me and my brothers and sisters. And they got him into the house and they sat him in his armchair. Obviously, he was that kind of man, had a designated armchair. It was like a throne. That's where he dominated the house from. And they sat him down in the chair. And I'll take this to my grave. He slurred, "There's a savage wind out there today, lads." So the wind had taken him into the garden, but not the drink, which was hilarious. So there are 2 tangents of my DNA and my split nationality. The third one is the fact that I grew up in England. Like I said, I was born here in Cork and moved to England in 1969. My parents had lived separately until that point, even though they were married. Not an unusual arrangement in the 60s where the man was in England, in this case London, earning a living and trying to support his family. But when my youngest sister, the 4th girl, came along, they decided that we would move to England and set up family there. That's a very interesting tangent in my family life, because I've thought a lot over the years about what it must have been like for my father, who was still a very young man at that stage, 23 maybe, to go from living in digs and a kind of a single life in London to suddenly having a wife and 4 children living with him. I did ask him on a number of occasions, but my dad was the kind of unemotional man who told you chronologically what happened. So he did explain to me how he found the house, how my mum moved over, how we moved over, but he wouldn't answer the question, well, how did that make you feel? But I've no doubt it had a huge impact on him. I think the most interesting aspect of that move with hindsight is that my mother very quickly adopted the Queen. She loved the idea of the Queen and the royal family. And I think, having spoken to her a few times before she passed away about it, it was the fact that she'd come from poverty and a very difficult background in Cork. And then when they arrived in England, pretty quickly, my dad financially did very well. And they kind of found a nice, you know, kind of comfortable, almost middle-class life, where my mum had the ability to send money home, and you know, again, nothing unusual in this. My grandparents bought the house with money that my mum was sending home from London for my dad. But I feel that the idea that she had managed to come from poverty and had established herself in a, you know, what to her would have been a really nice life, that meant that England was really important to her. And the adoption of the Queen and the royal family was kind of part of that. It also meant that, obviously, we were educated in England, but my mum had us take extra lessons, elocution lessons. She wanted us to speak really well. She felt that was really important in life. So we were taught Queen's English. And we were and I mean very, very posh. There's not much of that accent left. I'll come back to what is left of it in a little while. So we stayed in England from 1969, maybe the late 69, start of 1970, until 1976 when we returned home here. Obviously, both my parents were from Cork, and while my mother had adopted England and was really happy there, my dad never settled. He was very, very unhappy, suffered with chronic homesickness, which didn't affect his physical health, but he did get psoriasis and other things, which was, you know, obviously an emotional impact on it. So he'd always wanted to return, and they had battled about it, I know now, for a number of years. And then in 1975, my mum did a deal with him. She said to him, "I'll come home if you buy me a house when we come back to Cork." And he said to her, "Well, how much is that going to cost?" And she said, I think £10,000 would do it. 12 months later, my dad arrived into my mother's living room with a bank account with £10,000 in it. That's how desperate he was to come home. There's a very interesting story about what happened with the purchase or non-purchase of that house, but I won't get into that today. So in 1976, we returned to live in Cork. We were thrilled, and I'll talk about me, I was thrilled to be moving back to Cork. We had spent every summer here in between the time we moved over, when schools broke up in England for 6 weeks, summer holidays. They don't get the long, lengthy ones you get here. We would return to Cork and spend the 6 weeks here, and we would live in my grandfather's house for those 6 weeks. And we absolutely loved coming to Ireland on holidays. The freedom for children in Cork compared to what we had in London was just incredible. So in London, we lived in a place called the Elephant and Castle down in East London. And we had a space around our home of about 500 square meters, if you want, that we were allowed to explore without telling my mum or dad we were going any further. It was a high-rise area. We didn't live in high-rise, but we were surrounded by high-rise flats. And obviously London is a big city, and around the corner was the Walworth Road, which was a very, very busy road for traffic. In comparison to Cork, it was a motorway. So the idea of coming back to Cork and having that freedom permanently, where we could get up at 9 o'clock in the morning and go out with our cousins or our friends and not have to tell anyone where we were going, and come home at 9 or 10 o'clock at night and have nobody tearing their hair out wondering where you were, was you know, to have that on offer as a permanent childhood at the time was just incredible. And we knew we'd spend lots of time slogging apples and doing bonfire nights, things that you didn't get an opportunity to do in London. It transpires that the move back did have that magical element to it. But it also transpired for me, particularly of the four of us, to be a very difficult move. The adjustment to school here, which still had corporal punishment at that time, for me was very, very difficult. It had been banned in England a number of years before, and I had never seen anybody punished by a teacher in the way that I saw it here when we came back. I can still vividly remember the first day I saw a leather strap in Sullivan's Key Primary School, and actually being horrified and taken aback by it. My younger brother did struggle with that as well, but I really struggled with it. And some of that was because I always had a rebellious personality and was quite happy to speak my mind. And Christian Brother schools, they weren't fond of those young students that were speaking their mind. So I received, brought upon myself a lot of attention for that type of thing. The other thing that made it very difficult was the English accent. We went to live in a place called Toca here in Cork. I don't know if you guys know, but it's a very strong working class area. We had a great time there in lots of ways. but we were very much sore thumbs. And every time we opened our mouths, we got a lot of attention. So my first day in school in Sullivan's Quay, I had a teacher called Mr. Drew, who turned out to be an absolutely wonderful man, and I mean a wonderful man. He had this thing that new students introduced themselves. So picture the scene. September, first day back at school, a bunch of young boys, 11 or 12. Nobody wants to go back to school. They're all exhausted. They're all, thinking about other things. A lot of them are lying, sitting in their chair, but they have their heads down on the desk. They don't have a lot of interest in what's happening. And Mr. Drew says, "We've a new student. Stand up and introduce yourself." So I stand up to introduce myself. And 3 words into my first sentence, everybody in the room is gawking at me with absolute awe. This is a mythical creature almost. And I vividly remember at the first break, or the little break as we used to call it, being swamped with people asking me to talk and just hear me speak, and then realizing my brother was with me, and there was 2 of us, and we were like a circus show. And that was funny in some ways, but I'd had quite a traumatic childhood, which I'm not going to talk about today. And I know that at that stage I'd already developed a lack of self-esteem, and I had a struggle with my own confidence. So that became very difficult, and that became a regular thing. So to just explain the English accent to you, because there's not much of it left, you may not be able to hear it, but there is bits of it in there. And I developed a phrase in my late teens when people would ask me to say something because they wanted to hear me have an English accent, where I would say to them, "I'm going to the shop to buy 13 perfect bananas for a party on Thursday." And in there is all that's left of it now at this stage. And being asked to speak wasn't unusual. I could be standing at a bus stop and somebody I know would approach me with somebody I didn't know and literally just say to me, "Say something," like anything, so that whoever was with them could actually hear my English accent and have a giggle. Which again, in hindsight and where I am now in my life, it's great and it's very funny, but it was very challenging for me at that time. And it fed into the lack of self-esteem, and my teenage years were hugely challenging. I realize now, looking back in it, that the things that got me through that and the things that helped me to deal with a mental health issue that came many years later, which is founded on that lack of self-esteem, are actually the DNA things that came into my head when I spoke to Moze about this first. So my father is a very, very mentally strong man. He may not be the most expressive man, he may not be the most emotionally available man, but he has an incredible mental strength. He's had unbelievable challenges in his life. His eldest brother, there was 3 boys in his family, his eldest brother, who's like 2 or 3 years older than him, in today's world would have received an awful lot of help as a child for what would be regarded as an anger issue or something along those lines. And my dad has had experiences of waking up in the middle of the night with his older brother at the bottom of his bed, threatening to kill him, and on one occasion have a knife in his hand threatening to kill him. So that's just one example of the challenges he had in his life, but he's managed to deal with them. So I think I've inherited that mental strength, because I've no doubt that I've had to have that and that resilience to come through the challenges I've had with my own mental health and the strength of that. In addition to that, my grandfather was obviously a very strong, mentally strong man. The challenges in his life, the era he grew up in, being involved in unions at that time, all those things I think have definitely traveled down through the DNA to me. And in addition to that, I've inherited from both those men again. Both those men were unusual, is the term I'm going to use, dressers. My dad was one of these people that he came home from London at one time when he was living in London with a leather jacket with his name emblazoned on it in silver studs across the back of it, into Cork City in 1968 or 1967. And my grandfather he would have dressed an awful lot like the gangsters as we would know them from the movies. He was very dapper, 3-piece suits, tie, always wore a shirt and tie, always had the tie tied up properly, always wore a hat, usually slightly tilted to the right-hand side. And he loved shoes. He was mad into spats. The first time I ever encountered the word spats was through my grandfather. And I've inherited that as well. I absolutely love shoes. I think that's my feminine side coming to the fore. Those of you who've met me more than once or twice will know that I have a tendency to wear very bright, unusual shoes. So those things follow down through the DNA, and my love of music has come down through DNA. My mother's family were very musical. My grandfather was a singer. He had two sons who were fantastic singers, both who sang semi-professionally and could possibly have sang professionally in, you know, if certain things had fallen into place. And the other thing that definitely I've inherited through my grandfather is a love of words. My favourite memories of my grandfather are being in his bedroom in Greenmount Avenue. And in that house that they built, when you walked into the bedroom, there was a wall on the right, and then there was an alcove at the end of it. And most people had either put a fitted wardrobe into it or had a wardrobe in front of it. My grandfather had a wardrobe that covered half it. And when you went into the alcove, it was just piled up with books. And he used to collect the Reader's Digests. And I spent many, many, many afternoons in that bedroom with my grandfather, especially when he was on a well later in life. And we'd be flicking through books. And I don't know if all of you have ever read the Reader's Digest, and I don't know if they still do, but there used to be a thing that when you opened it, the first thing you had was a page of where they had a selection of words, and there was a choice of 3 things that word would mean. And on the following page were the answers. And we used to spend hours just playing with that. He'd read the word, read out the 3 possible meanings, and I'd have to guess, or educatedly guess, what was that, which was the actual meaning. And you know, it was much later in life that I realized, I was probably in my mid-40s before I realized how deep my love of words is, despite the fact that it was with me right throughout my life. I have always been a very good reader. Lots of obvious things, all the Enid Blytons, all the Hardy Boys, Roy the Rovers comics when I was a child. I have to tell you my favourite story about Roy the Rovers. It was to do with my younger brother. We were sitting in the kitchen one day and he was reading Roy the Rovers, and it was only me, him and my mum. And he said to my mum, "Mum, what does the word "astomp" mean?" And my mum said to him, "I've never heard of it." And he looked at me and I said, "I've never heard of it." And my mum said to him, "What's the context?" So he read out this little speech bubble in Roy the Rovers that said, "The astomper in the stadium was electric." And it was actually the word atmosphere. And he'd been reading Roy the Rovers for 3 years at this stage, and had been reading the word atmosphere as a stomper for 3 years. And we had such a giggle about it. And I suppose that little story now that has come to me is an example of how that fascination with words was always with me. And when I discovered music for myself in my teenage years, it was through words that I discovered it. I can still remember my first really strong interaction with song lyrics, and it's the Simon and Garfunkel song, "I Am a Rock." My mum and dad had their greatest hits, and I was playing on the record player. And if you know the song, you'll know the opening. It was "A winter's day in a deep and dark December. I am alone, staring through my window." And it's the next line, "On a freshly fallen, silent shroud of snow." Now, I actually thought he said shower of snow, and I thought that for years. But the point is, I leapt off the seat, and pardon my French now, Moze, I went, "What the fuck did he just say?" And went over to the record player, and I put the needle back, and I put it back to hear it over and over and over again. And right throughout my life, that has been with me. I have discovered as many musical artists through their words as I have through their music. I remember finding the Counting Crows, and a friend of mine had given me a tape, and I'm playing the tape in the background, and he's got this song called "Time and Time Again." And it opens with the phrase, "I wanted to see you walking backwards. Wanted to see you walking away from me without the sensation that you're leaving me alone." And I could actually see it in my head, and rewinding the tape to hear that one line over and over and over again. Wanted to see you walking backwards without the sensation of your leaving me alone. And so that definitely has gone down through my grandfather. My father loved words in different ways. He was a crossword man. I have lots of memories of doing crosswords with him as a child. And he was a big jigsaw puzzle man, and we did lots of jigsaw puzzles together as a child. The treat for me was that he would frame them afterwards. He could create a wooden frame and hang them on the wall. And I remember one time we completed a 2,000 piece. This was in Wannsey Street in England, so it's pre-1976. It was probably 74. A 2,000 piece jigsaw of the Taj Mahal. And when we finished it, there was a piece missing right in the middle of the jigsaw puzzle. The devastation is with me to this day. To this day, I actually remember begging my father to go out and buy another one. Jigsaw puzzles were much more expensive in those days, and he didn't buy another one. So I suppose that's kind of how the DNA has followed me down through the years from both the Italian side and the Murphy side. And I suppose I'm going to finish it by talking a little bit about how that split nationality can affect you. I mean, I'm sure lots of people have experienced growing up in different countries, and lots of people have, nowadays, especially of different strands. But it kind of crystallized in my mind in 2016 when Cormac Glally asked me to write a poem about the 1916 centenary. And my initial reaction was I wasn't actually sure if I wanted to do it. I'm proud of being Irish. I have no difficulty with my family being Irish, but I'm not one of those staunch Republican kind of guys. And having grown up in two countries, I believe, and certainly what it left for me, was an understanding that in reality, you know, we're all the same. I had lots of English friends. Lots of my family lived in England. You know, they want the same things that we want. They want to be happy. They want to be peaceful. They want the best for their children. They want to be safe. All those kind of things. So in my teenage years, especially, but even in later life, and even to a much lesser degree, but even now, if I'm at an Irish Republican ballad session, I kind of struggle. You know, there's elements of it I love, but there's, you know, the idea of, you know, get out your black and tans and all this stuff, that kind of upsets me a little bit. So that was my first thought when I was asked to write the poem, and I genuinely thought for a while I wasn't going to do it. But then I started to think about, you know, what those people sacrificed, and not just those people who went to fight for Irish freedom in 1916, but the people who fought in the First World War, and that would include my grandfather's family, and the debt we owe these people, because we do live a genuinely very free life. And we can have discussions about, you know, exactly what's going on with Ireland, but certainly my family, and by that I mean my mum and dad and us as children, and my own family, my wife, my children, we live a very free life. And that led me into a train of thought where I thought, okay, I might be able to write something about this. And so I ended up writing a piece about a man. And the only reason it's a man is because women didn't go to fight in the 1916 Rising. I'm not saying that's right, but that's just the way it was. It's about a man getting out of bed on the morning of the Easter Rising to go and fight for his country, and what I think would be in his mind, both the things that are motivating him to go and fight for his country and those things that would hold you back. And the things that I believe would hold you back is the love of your family and the possibility of not seeing your family again. So I'm going to leave you with this poem. It's called Restless Farewell. Goodbye, my darling asleep. Goodbye, my little son. I'm off to Dublin in the green of Ireland, my Ireland. I know, my love, this is the day that I lament for the lost, and the right of man will breeze from Clare to here. I know, my love, this is the day the Derriere and Dingle Bay hear the call of bold Fenian men, James Larkin, Padraig Pearse, and that the answer from sweet Tralee to Skibbereen, where the sun and a soldier's song is rising, will be wrapped the green flag around me, boys, and we shall overcome. So blow, ye winds, a dream of liberty. Blow, ye winds, a Celtic symphony. And over Ireland all, let the people sing. Rebellion, freedom. Go home, you British soldiers. You'll never beat the Irish. And blow, ye winds of Providence to protect. So at our journey's end, when the boys come rolling home, or the women of Ireland see a soldier return, not a bunch of red roses on holy ground, and bagpipe music at a gravestone marked here lies a soldier. And blow, ye winds of Providence to protect. So at our journey's end, every soldier's son can hug the old man and know once more love's old sweet song. And blow, ye winds of Providence, for the working man in Belfast and the boys of Fairhill, who, remembering the flight of the Earls, Robert Emmet, and the great hunger, will win freedom from the big, strong man. I know, my love, in Belfast and Botany Bay, Irish eyes are smiling. For this is the day the foggy dew in the valley of Knockanore and the gay Galtine Mountains sings a song for Ireland. I know, my love, this is the day that Waterford boys and Galway girls wearing the green of Ireland my island, march to freedom. Yes, my darling asleep. Yes, my little son. This is the day. So goodbye, Irene. Goodbye, lovely Johnny. I'm off to Dublin in the green of Ireland with James Connolly and Michael Collins to say farewell to an Ireland unfree. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Okay, we've got 13 minutes. Does anyone want to go? I have a thing prepared, but anyone need to go now? No? Okay.
Stan, there were women in the 1916 rising.
Were they actually fighting in the 1916 rising?
Countess Markovich.
Yeah,
Green.
and Margaret Skinner as well.
Okay.
Countless others.
Yeah, I didn't. I
Sorry, Moze.
No, that's fine. I mean, I thank you for that because I've thought about that a lot, and I genuinely believe they actually didn't go to fight.
The silent voices of 1916.
Yeah, I know that, and I know there was lots and lots of women involved in 1916, but I didn't know if they actually went and turned up and actually fought, but they actually did.
Well, yeah, I think Margaret Skinner had one of the guns, didn't she?
Yeah, so did Countess Markovich.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That's actually really
Check it out, Stan. Check it out. I might be talking a myth because she's a Glasgow woman, you know.
No, as soon as we finish, I'll be Googling that because I've actually thought a lot about that when I've been doing this poem. And it actually eases the pain because for me, it's horrendous if they didn't actually go to fight because obviously people like Countess Markovich and countless others had a huge influence on that event actually even happening. And you're right, you know, I mean, I remember sorry, no, Moze, just for a second.
It's okay, I'm feeling a passive aggressive sort of, and what about me?
We hijacked you.
Yeah. Did you see
I'm a woman.
thing, Mary?
Sort of. Okay, we can continue this afterwards.
We can
stay here for hours. And maybe Maria will turn up as well. Okay, I'll try and keep it short. Of course, everyone's life is like a book like this.
Well, yeah.
Suffice it to say that I think I have 4 religions in me and 2 races.
Wow.
So the 4 religions would be Catholicism, Protestantism, Jewish, and socialism, which I declare is a religion in itself, except there's no God. I grew up in Holland, went to England. My father was imported from Germany. And I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents as well. When I was 12, I was in a school in Amsterdam, and I took part in a writing competition. Not because I was very ambitious, but because someone asked me who had lots of other things on his mind. And I liked writing. I was good at compositions. Maybe all of us here have sort of a thing for writing. I don't know, could be a thing for words. I just enjoyed it. I didn't put any sort of value on it in terms of vanity, not then. So the competition was in a classroom where lots of different pupils were all different ages. And we had to come in and sit down and focus. And it wasn't as in the normal school, you were just doing it for yourself. And I don't know what exactly happened there, but there was a blackboard with topics on it. One of the topics was the Negro, and I chose that. I don't know why. And I wrote a story. I won't go into the nature of the story at the moment. I don't have time. But what happened was that the story sort of unfolded in front of my eyes, far more strongly than ever before, and unfortunately far more strongly than ever since. I could just sit down, get my red pencil, and write it from beginning to end. It was like a film or a dream or whatever. And I didn't think much of it. It was just handy to have it. So I handed in my story with the teacher who was sitting there, and then I forgot mostly I forgot about it because I was in puberty and I was more concerned with the way I looked and the way boys looked at me or not looked at me. So one day, a few weeks afterwards, I had a tap on my shoulder and I looked up and I saw this gorgeous older boy who I'd seen in a play a couple of months earlier. His name was Menno. And in the play, he was playing a prince, dark hair, dark eyes, beautiful. And the play was called Don't Do It, Snow White. But he wasn't there to talk about the play. He was saying, okay, are you, I won't say my first name, but are you Jacobs? And because I had a different name now, which I won't reveal. That's a secret. And he said, I am one of the adjudicators of this competition. And nice story. And but I have to ask you something, because there was a Dutch teacher. Of course, this was in Dutch. But there was a Dutch teacher in the school. He was a bit like a bull. That man was in his 50s, very red head, scary man. I didn't have him as a teacher, and that teacher was also adjudicating the competition, and he doubted whether I had written it myself. Now, I've heard this story from quite a few people that in their past, at some time or other, when they were children or teenagers, that they did something or they wrote something, and they were doubted whether it had come from them or whether they had sort of copied it from somewhere. And I tried to explain, or I can't remember what I said, but at that specific moment, I realized afterwards something happened in me. Something split off from myself. And when I look back on it, I see like a kind of iceberg shard falling into the water. But that's not how I experienced it then. It's just that from that moment onwards, I started to doubt myself very, very much. And I think that has lots of reasons. And I don't think I can even find the reasons, because it had to do with the support that my father gave me, which wasn't great at all. My parents had divorced by that time. But I think he also didn't get a lot of support from his father, and all the way back, generations back. But anyway, from that moment onward, I mean, nothing happened with that boy, unfortunately. And I got a certificate, and the teacher had, I mean, he believed me, but that wasn't enough. The fact that that teacher, which was like an authoritarian figure, doubted me, sort of made my doubt myself totally. From that moment onwards, I couldn't even write the word I anymore when I had to. And when I had put in hand in compositions, I sort of worked all through the night trying to write something, and it didn't happen. And even later I became a journalist, and I wrote for money and I wrote for deadlines, but even then I had to douse myself with coffee to just start a story. My 4 years later, I have to fast forward, my maternal grandfather, who had moved out of their house to an old age pensioners home with my grandmother, he disappeared. This was in a suburb of Amsterdam with a lot of new construction, high rises, and they couldn't find him. And eventually they found him after hours and hours and hours, and he was lost in one of the newly constructed buildings. He had walked into there and had gotten, it was in August, but he had gotten hypothermia and he was carted off to hospital. I think because I experienced a lot of his moods when I was younger, and I think he just walked off angrily and got lost. And I went to visit him in the hospital. And he had been, there's a lot to tell about him. He'd run off to sea. He was very brave during the Second World War. My family took in people who were at the risk of being persecuted. But he's also somebody who sort of kept in his emotions very much, to the extent that he got a brain hemorrhage and a stroke. And I think that was psychosomatic. But when I came to visit him in the hospital, his mind was partly gone, I think, but his mind dwelled on a country he'd visited after he'd run off to sea as a young boy. And it was there that he was converted from Catholicism to socialism by a bosun after his father died. Because when he grew up, his mother had given loads of money to the church, and he disagreed with that because their family business had gone down the drains. It was a ship's chandler, and they had put all their money on the fact that sea ships would survive, but of course steamships took over, so they had no money left and he had to go work. But when he was lying in that hospital bed, he was in that country, in Indonesia, and he said it was the most beautiful country on earth. And that really lifted my spirit, the fact that my, grim old grandfather had sort of moved to a different dimension inside his head. So I went outside, I'd come there by bus, and I had to hand in a composition the next day to that same teacher that had, sort of doubted me all those years back. So I sat down on the bus stop and I wrote something about my grandfather, something about my love for my grandfather, and it ended, I can't remember the rest of it, but it ended with, and I love you, Grandpa. And when I handed it in the next day, the teacher said, well, okay, you could be a writer. And I was pleased to hear that, but the fact was that it didn't cancel out what had happened before. And I still have not found a way to cancel that out. I'm still looking for it. And that's one of the reasons why I want to write about my family and about myself, as opposed to about the rest of the world, because I want to find that particular thing in us that is wounded so much that we cannot overcome it. Not easily. Maybe never, maybe in some ways. So if you find that recipe, let me know. That's my story. Great. 2 minutes to spare. 2 minutes to 4. Thank you all very much. I mean, Maria Gillen said that she had another workshop. She said she might come later. So I'm going to stay here, and everyone else who wants to stay here is very welcome. I think I'm going to pause the recording and then we can just talk amongst ourselves or leave or whatever. Ah, there she is, Maria.
I thought you were recording.
Jesus, right on time.
Hi, Rae.
Maria.
Hello, how are we? I'm so sorry.
Are
you having a ball?
Yeah, I was just talking about you. I was saying that.
Sorry, I need to go. So,
okay, Rob, thank you very much.
Nice meeting you, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah, will it be possible to hear Maria's on the recording or something later?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, as far as anyone have a problem with putting this online?
No.
No problem.
Okay. Well,
No.
stand by. Okay, thanks very much, Rob. Really appreciate
I
it.
need to go as well. I really apologise. I have to get the dinner
Okay.
on for my wife.
Of course.
We'll have a band in separate meeting another time then, lads.
Yeah, it would be lovely to see you again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Lovely meeting you. Lovely meeting you, Brian.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye.
But stories, I had a brilliant weekend, kind of with Daniel Morden, and he was looking at how to make stories, old stories, appropriate to the modern day world, that kind of thing.
Okay, great.
So, yeah, so it was fascinating.
That sounds really good.
Yeah,
And do you
really
have a
enjoyed it.
story, old or new, for us?
I have. No, I've heard this is the ancestral, aren't I right? The ancestral telling.
That is the theme, yes. We've been diving heavy into our own DNA, our own navel, our own ancestors. It was great,
exactly.
Really good.
So I was actually I was thinking of stories that my mother told us, kind of, and things that actually happened for them, So I have 2 stories. One is my mother's story of being a child in the 1930s. So my mom was born in 1938, and the world was just coming into World War II,
Yeah.
So this story is what they used for toys. So there was no money, but there was great creativity and there was great ingenuity. And one day she was walking home and the lashings of rain were coming down, and in the sewers there was loads of things floating along. They used to call them the storm drains. And her friend said, "What's that, Annie?" And my mother bent down and picked it up, and it was actually the claw of a chicken. And she said the reason for this is because the more processed the food, the more money you spent. So women would buy a chicken that had to be plucked and that still had the head and the claws on it. And then they would cut those off and they would pluck the chicken, and it would be cheaper for them to get the meat that way. So obviously somebody had just chopped off these you know, the chicken claws, and they'd fallen into the storm drain. And my mother went, "Oh my God, that's disgusting!" And her friend said, "No, Annie, no, wipe it down, and I'll show you something magic." So my mother wiped it off of her school uniform, and then she held it up and she said, "See those strings, Annie?" And my mother caught hold of the strings, and when she pulled the strings, the claw went like this. Because of course they were the sinews, the sinews of the claw. And my mother went, "Oh," and she said, "I know exactly what I'm going to do with these." So she went home to our house in Granabraher, and there was one room for the girls. So there was 2 sisters, and there was one room for the boys, and there was 6 boys in that room. And there was so many of them in there that my grandfather, who was a carpenter, had made a big bed, and 3 of them slept on the top and the other 3 slept on the bottom, so they slept top to tail. So in those days, electricity had just come to Cork, and people would have one light lit in the landing, but they wouldn't have the lights lit in the bedrooms like we have today. And then that light would shine into all of the rooms. So the boys were inside in the room discussing how things had gone for them that day. And my mother went out in front of the bulb, and she put the claw up in front of it, and it cast a big shadow on the wall. And one by one, the boys stopped talking. And then eventually one of the younger ones went, "Here, boy, do you see that thing up on the wall?" And there was an answer from one of the brothers saying, "Oh no, I was hoping that was my imagination. You're telling me it's real." And they all started screaming. So my grandmother came up the stairs and she says, "I'll give it to you now, you know, there'll be no more roaring and shouting, it's time for bed." Because this would have been her quiet time. She had 9 kids, you know, kind of, and she had very little time to herself. So she quietened them down and she went back downstairs, and my mother waited for a little while. And when everything was quiet, she crept back out onto the landing, and she put the claw up in front of the bulb again, and it started opening and closing. And the boys had a big discussion. Who were they more afraid of, the claw or Granny? And they decided that they were more afraid of the claw than their mother. So they started screaming again, but they hopped out of the bed and they climbed in underneath the bed. When they were inside, Granny came up. This time she was armed with a brush, and she went, "Who's roaring? I give ye roaring." And she put her brush under the bed and she was trying to sweep them out, but they were able to stay away from her, you know. So they made their own fun, I suppose, is the point of it. And, you know, they got so much out of something that didn't cost anything at all. And then when my mother had her own children and her own grandchildren, she also got a great story out of that, and it was one of my favorite stories to hear from my mom. So yeah,
it's brilliant. Yeah. It's a brilliant kind of magic. Yeah, really.
So that's the heritage story, and if I have time, I'm not sure what the time limit is.
Well, we've just gone over the time limit. It's like, you know, it's like a match. But you're this, you know, tell the other story, and that's just great.
Okay, so this is the story that came out of the Daniel Morden workshop. So it's a very old story called The King of Colchester, and we re-engineered it to be applicable in today's world. So once upon a time in Bandon, there lived a farmer, and he had an ideal kind of life. He had a wife that loved him and he loved her, and they had a daughter that both of them cherished. And everybody knew this family by how gentle they were. And this came out in how they handled people in a handshake, how they handled their animals, the ready smile that was always on their face, and the light in their eyes. But as we know, reality can sometimes get in the way. And we know what that's like right now in the middle of COVID-19. And this woman got sick, and she was taken before her time. And now the father and the daughter, they were left alone and grieving. And over time, the girl began to ask her father questions that a mother should answer. And he was either embarrassed or didn't know the answer to give her. So he began to look around and he spoke to the matchmaker. And the matchmaker said he knew of a widow in Cork City, a widow with a daughter of her own. And they met, and he liked her, and she liked him, and she was pleasant enough, and he was pleasant enough, but they had different ways. Over time, they decided to get married, and she moved from the city centre to a farm in Bandon, and she realised she didn't like it very much, and he realised that she mightn't be well suited to farm life. She didn't like to get up early in the morning. She liked to read fancy newspapers and listen to local radio. She didn't like to take off her fancy shoes and put on Wellington boots, and you'd never catch her milking the cow with her cheek up against the flank of the cow, singing songs to get more milk. She began to get bitter towards his daughter because she thought that he was showing favoritism. So when he wasn't around, she ordered the daughter around a lot. And when he was around, she would tell lies on the daughter, and he, being a trusting man, would believe those lies. One day, he kissed his daughter and said, "I'm off now to the fair. Will you be okay, my dear?" "I will," she said, and he kissed his wife and his stepdaughter too. As soon as he was gone down the road, the mother said, "Right, I want you to go into the middle of the forest, right into the middle. There is an old well there, and they say there is a cure in the water. I want you to get me a flask of that water." And the girl said, "Oh, don't send me into the middle of the forest on my own. Can my sister come too?" And the mother said, "No, that's not allowed. And why would you be afraid in your own country? Don't you know every creature that crawls or flies or gambles here?" "I suppose I do," she said. And so the mother gave her day-old hard bread, a lump of hard cheese, and a bottle of old beer in a burlap sack. And off she went into the middle of the forest. It felt like she was tramping through that forest for hours and hours, when suddenly, out from behind a tree, sprung a man. His smile was so wide that both ends of it nearly met at the back of his head, and he had twinkling eyes and a big, long, straggly beard. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. "And have you anything to eat?" I have bread and cheese and one bottle of beer, and you're welcome to share it with me." So they sat down and shared a meal and a laugh and a song and a poem or two. And then she told him that she was looking for the old well. "Oh, you go down to the end of the high thorny hedge," she said, "and when you can walk no further and you can't come back, that's when you take this stick and say, 'Hole up here,' and strike the hedge." "Okay," she said, and took the wand, and off she went, and it was just as the man said. And she struck the hedge, "Hole up here," and she went through. When she went through, it seemed that even the weather was fairer on the other side of the hedge, and straight away she could see the well. And the man had said to her, "If you see strange things, pretend that they're normal and do whatever you're asked." With this knowledge in her head, she went to the edge of the well, and she looked in, and there, rolling around and around and around, were 3 old men's heads with long beards and long scraggly hair. And they began to sing to her, "Take us out, wash us, comb our hair, lay us down." And she smiled at them, and one by one, with her gentle hands, she lifted the heads out of the well. She combed through their hair, taking out any stray leaves or little insects that might be there. She scrunched their cheeks so that they smiled up at her, and she did this, one little head after another, laying them on the primrose bank as the sun shone down. And one head said to the other head, "What do you think now we should give her for that?" And the other head said, "Something lovely and unusual." And the middle head said, "Let's make her smell like summer." And they told her to get a flask of water from the well. So she went over to the well and she sunk the flask in until it was full to the very top. And she took a drink, and immediately flowers started springing up around her and birds started singing in the sky. And if it was possible, it got sunnier still. When she got to the hedge this time, she didn't need the wand, for the hedge opened up and bowed before her. And off she went with a flask of water, heading for home. But on the other side of the hedge, there was a young man from a neighbouring farm. The first thing that he noticed was the beautiful smell wherever she went. The next thing he noticed was the light in her eye and the ready smile, and how when she touched his hand, it felt so soft like velvet. And then he found out other things. She was a great singer and a great weaver of stories, and he fell for her and he asked her to marry him. Well, when she went home and told her father was delighted for her, for this was a really good family. But her stepmother and her stepsister were so cross that they were spitting feathers. The sister resolved that she would do the same thing and get herself a good match. So early in the morning, her mother gave her a slice of sweet cake, a fine meat sandwich, 2 bottles of beer, and off she went on her journey. It wasn't long before she met the old man, and he said to her, with a smile as wide as if it would meet on the back of his head, "How are you today?" "And what are you doing talking to me?" she said, and walloped him across the head. As she carried on, he said, "Well, I don't wish you any well, although I don't wish you any bad either." And she got to the big thorny hedge, and she could see a little gap. It was like what her sister had said. And she tried to go through the gap, but if she did, the thorns came down and bopped her on the nose and caused blood to fall from her face. When she got to the other side of the hedge, it was kind of grey and overcast, a portent of doom. And she saw the well. Up she went to the well, and she saw the 3 heads inside, and they sang to her too. "Take us out and lay us down, comb right through our hair." And for their trouble, she caught her burlap sack and hit 1, 2, 3, so that they got submerged in the water. As they continued to roll around inside in the water, one head turned to the other and said, "What does she deserve?" And the second head said, "Not much. Let's give her just what she deserves." And the third head said, "Let's make her smell of 20-year-old stale sweat." And then they took a flask of water and popped it up onto the side of the well. She drank that water. It was brown and murky. And as soon as she drank it, all the flowers began to wilt and die. All the birds flew away, and it started to rain. She ran up to the hedge, which was thicker now because it was fending itself against the coming storm. She had to fight her way through, and when she got to the other side, her clothes were in a state. There was blood everywhere, and everybody that felt her coming just ran away. But when she came out on the other side, she could see her sister sitting in a carriage with her new husband, and her sister popped down and gave her a flask. She drank from that magical flask, and straight away the smell dissipated and all her cuts and bruises went away. She looked into the eyes of her sister and she said, "How can you treat me so well when I treated you so ill?" And she said, "Because I love you and you're my family." And she could feel her heart soften, and she could feel a kind of light coming into her own eyes, and she could feel her smile that had been missing for a long time beginning to curl up her face.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Maria. Thank
Welcome, and thank you, Daniel Morden, for working on that story.
Okay, you told it. Great, thank you. I'm going to try and put it up. I hope it's not too heavy for me, but I put it up in the cloud, so hopefully I can transfer it to the spoken word page. I think that's the. Have you all access to that? Anita, do you have access to the spoken word page? But I probably put it on YouTube.
Okay.
Anita's muted.
Yeah, we have a YouTube channel. Just have to work out how.
Yeah.